Well, at the time, it seemed to me that in British art, picturing wasn't very much of interest to people, which of course, as an artist, it's always more interesting to be dealing with something that other people aren't so interested in, because the territory is less crowded with interest. And I like the idea of picturing because it seemed to me it was very, very basic about image making and about representation. And what I was interested in was the very fact that you could make a representation of something, and that gave you the sense of the presence of something which was not in fact present. I had been dealing a lot with ready-mades, and then I started to think about painting. So my first choice was obviously ready-made paintings, and so I was living quite close to Portobello Road at the time. So I went to Portobello Road for some months every weekend, and I would buy small pictures, and usually people sold them to me for the frames because they thought the pictures were worthless. At first I was going to paint on the little pictures, I was going to add to them, and then the more I had them, the more I felt like that was too aggressive towards them. And then I had this idea that I could alter them by simply inserting them flush with a piece of raw canvas in a square, put them in the left-hand corner, and with the implication of the surface being much larger than the surface in the little picture. So that the difference between each one of my pictures would be the fact that I had collaborated with a different artist, because I had no idea who the people were who painted these pictures, and each one was different in a slightly different style and a different subject matter. So they became, in the end, they were really about kind of a sense of authorship and what constitutes authorship, and the fact that the meaning of the little painting could be altered dramatically by the very simple thing of what I did. Having used simple, ordinary objects in my work previously, when I started to think about making images of things, it was obvious to me it seemed obvious to make images of the same kind of objects that I'd been using, so I started to draw objects. And that got me into the whole question about picturing and making images. They became a kind of vocabulary, and I reuse images all the time. I'm taking them, adding them together, and I think of what I'm doing is something equivalent to speaking. It's a kind of visual language. When we're in ordinary conversation, we only use a couple hundred words most of the time. There are of course thousands of words, but we don't use most of them. We use a very few, but we have very varied conversations by simply reorganizing a small number of words. And I've been trying to indicate the same kind of thing through picturing, that by reorganizing these images, by changing their inflection, which is their color, or changing their scale, or whatever it is, which are visual equivalents of things that happen in verbal language, that somehow I could draw out many different meanings from this vocabulary of simple things. I have entered into the world of paintings, and one of the extraordinary things about making paintings is that as soon as you put a brush to a canvas, you've entered into the whole history of Western painting. You are actually entering into a historically based, a historical world. So over the years, I came more and more to feel that to make proper paintings, I needed to use the things that were appropriate to the language of painting, and that obviously drawing and color are space. These are the basic elements of a subject matter. These are the basic elements of a painting language. So I try to use them in my own way. The drawings are very precise, and I never think of them as cartoon-like. They're very precise drawings of specific objects, and in that sense, they're very realistic. The drawings, I never distort the drawings. Whereas the color, I realized that I could be totally the opposite with the color. I could have complete freedom. I could do things that were quite arbitrary. I could make things yellow that were not at all yellow in the world. It made absolutely no difference. I could change it back. I could change it to pink or use blue instead. That these things had meaning within the composition of the painting, but not within the meaning of the objects. So I try to play between those two things of something that's very, very ordered and very precise, and then something which has a high degree of freedom about it, of arbitrariness. One of my basic premises has always been that actually everything is capable of expressing everything.